Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session, Cultural Digital Paranoia and Mania. And I know that we had some noise in this room. This tells us this is very timely, this talk. This session will be focused on how can we find silence in a world of noise. And we are surrounded by all kinds of environmental things happen in our lives, and we tune into our machines, we tune out in our phones, in our laptops, notebooks, you name it, and we are quite attuned to it. We are actually in it so much that to find silent moments in an environment of noise is sometimes a challenge. Like we had an construction going on, and now it's really quiet, which is really pleasant. But we see a difference in terms of how much easier it is to be mindful in these moments where we can tune out, be mindful, attentive, become aware of who we are, where we are. We tune inside and notice what's surrounding us to really embody the mindfulness practice that we do. Now, when we look at digital and social media, there is also the trend to really pull us out of these moments of silence. And our social media use, if we look worldwide, is exponentially growing. We have 32.8% of the world population that is actually heavily engaged in social media, and we see also the trend projected upward. In the US, we are one of the most heaviest users worldwide, with 78% of people who have desktops and laptops. 75% use handheld computers and smartphones, and possibly here at a university campus, we are close to really 100% penetration. Even households in metropolitan areas, of course, they are even more likely to use laptops, handheld devices, and this is pretty steady throughout the population. If you look at social media use, Facebook is still the most popular social media platform with close to 80%, followed also by Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, Twitter, and possibly these numbers for Twitter are a little underestimated, because with our president tweeting so heavily, these numbers may need some updating, because there are millions plugged into also Twitter. Interestingly enough, if you look at the online population in terms of differences, women are slightly higher than men in terms of the connectivity in Facebook. It's pretty steady across the age classes, with senior people possibly less so engaged in Facebook. But of course, the numbers as we see them, they are pretty high and steady. If you look at, for example, numbers by degree, by income, or also compare urban and rural areas to each other. And it's also interesting to look at how heavy social media are used. For example, Facebook, if you see here the numbers for daily usage, 76% weekly, are still pretty high, and similar numbers are also here provided for Instagram, Twitter, and other social media platforms. And it's also quite interesting, if people use one type of social media or digital platform, they tend to use others too. That indicates that there is a strong correlation, and also multitasking is also quite prominent. And one last slide that gives us some information about the use of messaging apps. Let it be WhatsApp, Kik, Snapchat, Wicker, Yik Yak, and I don't know them, actually all of them, Whisper and others. They are in particular popular among the younger crowd, college students, high school students, and it starts pretty early. Some numbers are not covered here in terms of the age classes because the younger millennium generation and younger, the Generation Z, the more heavy actually the use of messaging apps. And this shows us there is a digital cosmopolitan that has been developing. From early age on, our kids are attuned to the machine. They are in it literally because text messaging and other tools that are used starts very early on. If you look at some messages here, in average, there are about 42 messages sent per day. And 18 to 24 years old sent about 110 text messages per day, with roughly 19 billion text messages sent alone in the US. And these numbers are pretty striking, and I ask and invite you also to think of your messaging really attitude. How many text messages do you send? And do they look like the one here shown on this slide? Hi, hey, I love this app. So it's very basic chatting, right? And if you think of the amount of time also it takes to send things forth and back, it's an immense amount. We have digital assistants that are also surrounding us, let it be on our iPhone, Siri or others, that assist us. They are on standby. They make it easy for us to attune to, in essence, the machine. And mindfulness, the mindfulness day to day, we might have to change our language to something like, in your mind's browser, clear your cache, now delete your history, rather than saying, well, let's work with our chatter mind, let's be calm, right? So there is different language that is developing to actually also invite us to sit down and meditate and become mindful as a generation change. Because our brains and our way of being in a world that is rather digitally oriented, that is full of information technology, we all have to some extent become digital cosmopolitans, where we go online and we tweet forth and back. Here are a few examples of the UF President Ken Fuchs tweeting out about UF also becoming top 10 public university, so that everybody knows. So there's lots of really very important and useful information that really comes to our smartphones, to our apps that we can read. And we get lots of information through, for example, Michael Mann, one of the most famous global climate change scientists, tweets on his account daily about climate change. He's very committed to get the word out, very, very supportive. So science benefits too, to get us engaged, and maybe to really engage us so much that we come back again and again and again to these same apps, to these same messages. We are waiting, in essence, also for the next thing to come in. And you might also be aware or not so aware that without your phone, without your smartphone, where no text messages come in, you feel kind of empty. You feel kind of, well, something is missing here. I'm not receiving any messages. Well, that cannot be right? And even spiritual groups and mindfulness and meditation groups, they also have been present in social media. Here one example, the coffee cups are shown, that invite us to just, maybe 1 second to tune down and calm down and maybe have a mindful moment or send us a reminder about it. But there are also messages that come in that sometimes are rather aggravating, and we just had a wonderful session with Jan Snyder, who talked about really some things that are sometimes polarizing, that are triggers, that truly put us to the test in terms of we look at it and we tense up. And this might happen to some of us with some text messages that are also delivered into our fingertips. But the point here is truly that we are all different, how we receive this type of really being surrounded by digital messages and information bits that come at us a lot, if we want it sometimes or not. Our phones beeping and really drawing our attention in. Because here from psychology we know that early childhood development is very important, where mother and caretaker and infant attune to each other. If there's a nurturing and caring environment that is created, attachment bonds are built. So we form a secure attachment where, in essence, the child has a security and grounding and feels safe, whatever comes. This might be something that is anxiety invoking, that might be fearful, but mom is there. There is an attunement and a security that is built up, and quite interestingly, research also has shown by John Bowlby, Alan Shore, Mikulinsa, Schaefer, Zimbarov, and many, many others, that really this attachment that is developed at very young age propagates into adulthood. So we keep these patterns typically. And if they are secure, we are very lucky, because we have a relatively firm grounding that, well, we can detach actually from our phones. We can detach from our text messages, and then we find time maybe later on to tune in. So there's a coming and going and rhythm, but there is no over attachment to I need to really get this message, or you grab to the phone 110 times, like we've seen these numbers, right, that some of us actually do to send messages forth and back. And this happens for those of us that have formed an insecure attachment, meaning that either we are anxious to really be attuned to our digital connectivity with others, because they replace in essence our bond, some craving that we want to connect, we want to have this relationship, but it becomes so strong that we might be picking up our smartphone not only 10 or 20 times, no, we are in there. We like to be in it and be related, because if we are not, we feel we are disconnected. Nobody loves us. Nobody is there for us. And anxiously attached individuals deal with an amplified attachment. And this might be text messaging, or this might be visiting Facebook multiple times each day, because that's where we crave to find what we are looking for, right? Now, there are also insecurely attached individuals that are avoidant style, and those deal with a detachment. It's all too much. It's overwhelming. No, I don't really need a Facebook account, right? Because those individuals try to keep a distance between those digital things that are out there that might be really not worthwhile to look into, because avoidant individuals have kind of flattened out. They are numbed out. They are kind of also disconnected from the world, and it's all too much, right? I'd rather be on my own. As an individual, I don't need to have 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 friends that are out there. And so the amplified detachment really is prominent in those type of individuals. Now, interestingly enough, there's a high percentage among the population, about close to 50%, that are adults and that have an insecure attachment style. And that also indicates to us we are primed also to be on perhaps one or the other side. Of course, it's sometimes diffuse if we are leaning more towards this side or that side, but there is also some priming that comes from our childhood patterns, and of course we can change them. For example, with practice of mindfulness, we might actually shift from an avoidance style to a more secure style. Or we might be securely grounded, but then really become somehow addicted and attuned to Facebook that it takes over our lives. That we play video games, or we are attuned to the machine, I call it. Now, we see also that these type of environments, they are shifting. They are shifting to, for example, mom being actually on the phone and not attuned to the child. And this might start very early with kids that are infants, 1, 2, 3 years old. And of course, what kind of impact that has when children at a very young age become really attuned to the computer, to visit online sites, to go into social media. That's a big experiment, because we don't actually know for sure what kind of pattern that will create and what kind of connectivity, what type of new relationships are formed. Are these kids really, is it for them more important to find 100 friends on Facebook that they actually don't know? Is that more important than, for example, somebody that is sitting right next to them? Like we are here in this room, right? We are sitting, we are a group of people. Is that more important? So these questions become really important, because how we connect, to whom we connect, and how often we connect to what. And this might also mean not only what we are connecting out there in cyberspace, but this might also mean, are we really connecting to ourselves? Are we connecting actually with who we are? Do we find actually minutes or hours in our days where we could say, well, we are tuned to ourselves. I actually know my feelings. I know emotionally if I'm really well attuned or not. Or are we not? Most of our hours that we spend during the day out there, distracted by something else that pulls us out, and actually our attention is rather focused on browsing the internet or browsing through information or visiting social networks. So this connectivity in terms of what we might also have seen walking across campus, sometimes it looks like that on the right-hand slide, that, well, everybody walks, but they do something. Their mind is someplace, but we don't actually know where our mind is. And mindfulness requires actually, and I will get to there, what really mindfulness is, and how we can attune also being mindful in a digital rich world. We have challenges, we all of us, because I bet everybody of you has a smartphone with you possibly, right? That is in your pocket. And we rely on this information here, in particular being in a college setting, in terms of helping us to study, helping us to find information, being connected also to our classmates, right? But there is also the downside that sometimes we might be only connected to the machine and not actually be present to where we are, nor the people surrounding us. So this mania that in essence also with the increase of digital media, of social networking platforms, pulls us in. And I think this cartoon image on the right hand side tells us something, that some days we are more connected with people that are in the virtual world than actually being face to face with them. And our relationships with that are also changing, because sometimes even we need to pull ourselves literally out of such an environment, because the tendency is that the digital world pulls us into cyberspace, where we might find various things that really either we find interesting, or we might live out our own needs that we have. And you might have seen also trolls that are now making also, I think, big headlines currently, with Russian trolls that are obviously on Facebook. It turns out that have made their round, where there are messages out there that come from a place of aggression, anger, unfulfilled needs, fear, and many other emotions that are lived out by somebody on the internet, in particular on social media, that we are all surrounded with. And there are some pretty miserable trolls out there these days. But now the question is really, what is happening with our mind? What is happening in all this information and energy that is shared in a digital world, but also among people, among us all? Because obviously patterns are changing. The question is also, who do we become by being in this type of environment of modern America, being, for example, here at a university that is surrounded also by digital use? And Dan Siegel, one of the most well-known psychologists and neurobiologists, has studied this in detail, and in particular also developed what he calls the Triangle of Wellbeing, where he places at the corners coherent mind, integrated brain, and empathic relationships. And I start here with the integrated brain because it sounds like, well, it's our brain that is up here. Because when we think of mind, we believe often that this is where our neurons and synapses are. That's where our brain power is. That's where our mind resides. But it is very well known that actually the integrated brain is our whole body. It's our whole nervous system. There are actually many also neurons that are in our gut, in our lower belly, that are found. So it's an integrated system that entails our whole body, that we use to take in sensations, but also that processes information and energy that comes in. And imagine now you spend like 7-8 hours a day with your computer looking into a screen. That's possibly how you train your body, how you train your neurons actually to be attuned to this type of really environment, looking at a screen and finding information out there, right? But integrated brain is really and the whole body with all its the nervous system and everything that comes with our physical body. Coherent mind provides also an indication for what Siegel calls and processing of information, but also energy that is exchanged. And this exchange happens between us individuals, with something else. And this might be you or you or you, but it might be also just a social media network where I tune in, Facebook, and my mind is attuned in terms of the energy flow and the information flow with cyberspace, right? So in essence, it's very abstract what we are doing with our mind and with our information and energy exchange. But important, there's a third quite important element, and Siegel calls this empathic relationships. These are relationships where we are really attuned. We are relating in some way that we are present to the moment that we experience. So we are not detached or dissociated, just mindlessly, sometimes 2 hours spending on the internet. We didn't even know that time passed by. We didn't even know what we spent, nor were we present to what we are actually just really doing by spending maybe 2 hours on Facebook, right? So empathic relationship is also a relationship where we are aware in terms of empathically relating and experiencing and taking in and noticing also our experiences. And this whole triangle can be also fostered, what Siegel calls mind-sight. It's a mindfulness practice that also allows us to attune and really be conscious to this process, so that we are not becoming mindless zombies by just really attuning to these 100 or thousands of messages that we process every day, right? So there is a way that allows us also to become more aware of the process itself in terms of our relating, our information exchange and our energy exchange that either makes us alive or pretty much deadens us and flattens us and numbs us out. And we have, in essence, tools that we can also use to really be more mindful with digital media, be more mindful within social media platform. The origins of mindfulness come from the Pali word sati, which relates to consciousness, awareness, attention, remembering, and also maintaining, and this is quite important, maintaining a constant present mind. So to really experience the present moment to what is, as Bhikkhu here rightfully explains, is quite an essential for being in a state of mindfulness. Other teachers that come from the spiritual realm, because these are thousands of years old practices that were developed early on, in particular in the East, like Chogyam Trungpa, Thich Nhat Hanh and others, they stress also that mindfulness in terms of Buddhist or Hindu context as well, quite similar, are based on 4 foundations. It's the mindfulness of body. So in essence, our brain, our nervous system, everything that comes with our physical body, because this is where sensations are experienced, where we hear things, we notice things, we see things. We in essence form a way to notice through our sensations. And mindfulness of life, that relates to the fundamental tendency of the mind also to cling, to attach. But also Eastern tradition built on, well, if there is attachment, there's also non-attachment. So it's not only that there's only one absolute. I attach to things, I attach to an object, I attach to Facebook, I attach to things. No, I actually have the possibility also to, in essence, be in a state of non-attachment. And that typically this rhythm of really non-attachment forms also gives us calmness actually. It is very pleasant, it is tranquil. Mindfulness of effort relates to the practice, because if you never practice mindfulness, we are possibly not a very mindful person, right? But if we practice and integrate this in our lives, then of course, typically also mindfulness really becomes a natural way of our being. Mindfulness of mind is possibly a little bit more difficult to understand. It relates to the state of being rather than watching an object, where we consciously are witnessing or observing a specific object like our breath, like the in-breath and out-breath. But here it's one notch up, essence. We forget about this witness. We forget we are not self-aware anymore. We are just in a state of being. And of course that might be where enlightened people reside most of the time. I don't know really, because I'm not there fully yet. I might have glimpses of it, but it is also that mindfulness has different elements that need to fall in place to really allow us to also experience mindfulness, and we can take conscious effort also to make us more mindful, to in essence experience whatever we experience, either digitally or in the real world. Now, secular mindfulness has stressed definitions like the one by John Kabat-Zinn that was developed early on in the 80s and 90s, where mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. This is possibly one of the most widespread known definitions of mindfulness that is used for mindfulness-based stress reduction, where the elements of attention, I need to be attentive to, for example, my breath. I quiet my mind. I'm aware of this process. I don't judge it. I'm non-judgmental, and I'm in the present moment. Now, with the element of non-judgment, there is a huge controversy out there, because this was, if you look at some of the Eastern scholars, this was never really mentioned in any of the sutras and teachings. This was an add-on that was kind of misconstrued and included in mindfulness definitions like MBSR. But Dreyfus, Bhikkhu, and others are very skeptical, because their view is that, well, we actually need to discern wholesome from unwholesome emotions or feelings. We need to be able to discern and actually judge, is this helpful for my life or not? So we need some kind of judgment to evaluate, in essence, also sometimes, oh, this is not helpful. I've spent 3 hours on Facebook. No, this is really not helpful, right? I actually need to go to work and actually do some real work. So here you see also some differences in terms of the interpretation. But to understand here the differences between attention, we are focusing, we are typically object focused, for example, the lower belly, that are also quite popular concentration area, where lots of neurons are located in our gut and lower belly. Pure awareness is a more open state of open monitoring and witnessing, but in that sense it's more diffuse, but we are still aware of the process, right, in terms of surrounding us, for what's happening actually surrounding us in our environment. And right now it's the noise, it's you, it's, for example, an embodied experience where I also use my sensations and perception, the interpretation of these sensations, to really create a state of awareness. Now, of course, this might be more a self-aware process, or where self-awareness more or less falls away, where the witness resides. We are getting to the right-hand side more in state of being, where in essence we might have a spontaneous insight that comes from a deeper place of being, right? And so we see also mindfulness really starts at the left-hand side and can culminate also to some of the effects that we see on the right-hand side, like positive affections, like compassion, generosity, love, and really open, nurturing, that becomes more natural, right? So mindfulness, in an embodied definition, is really deliberately paying full attention to what is happening around you and within you, in your body, in your heart, and your mind, in an integrated fashion, in the present moment. And we might do a little practice just to see, to take in what we just learned about mindfulness, And I invite you also to, and I know this is quite a challenge with the noise going on, but this also tells us something. It is there, right? It is something that happens in our environment, but we can still be aware of what's surrounding us and also then tune in to what is actually going on inside us. So let's do a short 2-minute practice where we attune to ourselves, and I invite you to sit comfortable in your chairs, where you sit upright and the palm of your hands, you might put it on to in your lap or on your thighs, whatever feels comfortable. Here it's not so much about the right posture, it's just about really practicing attention and awareness. And what we will do is to just focus on our breath, our in-breath and our out-breath in the lower belly. So first we attune to our lower belly, we feel into it. Just notice what's there. And with the in-breath, we expand our belly. And breathing out, we contract. So it becomes a rhythm of in-breath and out-breath. Of breathing in and breathing out. And I invite you to just continue with your breathing practice. Focus your attention and be aware inside of you, but also your environment. So it's taking in and marinating in the awareness. Let's continue for a few more moments. So slowly, we open our eyes, look around, we reconnect where we are, if you had the eyes closed. And notice how different this very short mindfulness practice was from the state that you were in before. There was a difference possibly that you noticed. Was there anything significant that you observed? Something that was different in these few moments of mindfulness? Does anybody like to share?
I heard the sounds, the construction sounds come, and then I noticed them and I let go of the focus on them. Because they were happening.
Yes, I know, now they are quiet. But this is also to integrate for what is there. And even if it is disruptful, right? Yeah, very well. Well, thank you. Yeah.
I noticed how shallow my breathing was.
So it changed. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Usually I'm just really fidgety, like I have the urge to constantly move around while I'm sitting. Breathing like that and closing my eyes, just let me be comfortable.
Thank you. So we can notice these things when we put our awareness onto them, because there are lots of things that just whoosh go by us, but really bringing also conscious, deliberately, really an attention to it is really a part of mindfulness, as we also have learned. Now this is how we also can, what mindfulness is also what we can use when we relate to the present moment of being right here and now. This might be, I call it the human world, when we relate or we sit in meditation practice, or we go on a mindful walk, or we actually go together on a mindful walk, where we are attuned, we are actually naturally also present to where we are and who we are, and things flow also naturally, right? And in the digital world, this can be the case as well, where we attune to our loved one and we relate to something that is really of interest, right? And we take in essence, consciously also with our attention and awareness to where we are browsing. We are aware of things. We are not pulled into it, and we are detached and dissociated from it, but we are present to what is going on. And this can even be in, for example, in Facebook, or watching a video clip. So environmental presence in cyberspace relates to I'm here and I'm noticing that I'm here. So bringing awareness to it. The temporal dimension is, in particular in cyberspaces, when things move. Because if you have a static website, there are no way to click anywhere, we lose interest, right? So for us is to be alive typically to something where we are drawn in. We have the possible option to put a like or to send a message or to do something. So aliveness comes also with move, with change, right? So where we can interact with things. Security on, for example, in the digital world is when we are familiar with the setup. We know how these buttons work, we know how the menu functions. And if for the 10th times this website has not updated, we feel really comfortable because we know what's there. Now some change is also nice to keep us curious, right, and engaged. But sometimes if there's too much change, right, then we become overwhelmed and say nothing, I cannot find anything anymore. So there is then typically also sometimes an really stepping back, some frustration in terms of, well, I browse elsewhere, right? But typically most of us are relatively engaged with very simple things like text messaging. It's just text, right? And maybe a few emojis that we send forth and back, but it's relatively simple. In terms of interpersonal presence, the social presence that draws us in is the relationship we find with others. We either connect with somebody we really know, and even in an online or distance education course, with people we know, we feel comfortable. We know we can connect, we can relate much more easy with a friend in Timbuktu, and we never heard about that name, but he or she sent us a message and I don't know who that person is, right? So we have a very different interpersonal relationship with somebody like that. But presence is also in the interpersonal space related to movement and activity, where we feel really secure and safe. And so the architecture in terms of presence has 8 dimensions according to John Sula, who is really an expert in this field. of cyber psychology that relates to, we have to, important is our own identity and the identity of others in cyberspace, social contact, machine interactivity, text, sensory stimulation, particular when it relates also to movement, shaping of time, simulation of reality, and also the physicality. And so one big question is now, are we really mindful when online or in the cloud? And John Sula has looked into this also more deeply in terms of the really the relationship that we have with our online environments, and he asserted that many times we are rather dissociated physically and psychologically, because what is happening in many cases is that there's multitasking and split awareness, where we try to answer an email, the phone is ringing, we browse through an internet site, but we have to actually fill out this form at the same time. And so every time we connect with something else, we try, we can do it all. But in essence, we are distributing our awareness over many, many things that we try to do at the same time. And mindfulness has been said also in the scholarly literature to be associated with monotasking. Mono means one thing at a time. In terms of presence, often if we do multiple things, we are also pulled out, typically out of the present moment. So there is this risk that we are actually not so present when we are online. That doesn't mean it happens all the time. We can be present if we really use a mindful approach to browsing, to being in cyberspace. Now these are some pictures from the Rights Union, from our students, from our UF campus members that you see here. And it is sometimes that we are attuned to, we actually tune out, right, with even earphones, because we try to separate us out just from the environment. We like to really be someplace in our, possibly in our mind space. And in terms of mindlessness and cyberspace, we might really ask ourselves, I thought you were going to stay offline to get more writing done, and an answer might come, I am. But first I need to tweet about our social media addiction group online chat tonight. And you see, these are temptations that come across our desk really all the time, possibly. Now what is really happening there when we said we are pulled into? And it's quite interesting that this is actually something that is also relates to our neurobiology, and it's called the dopamine loop. It's a neurotransmitter that is associated also with the reward system. In essence, the dopamine pathway works like the following, and I have a little clip that I think we have time to play, and that can actually explain it much, much better than I can. But in a nutshell, it is the reward system that draws us in. And we get rewarded by maybe, oh, nice message, right? And 5 seconds later, we think, shall I check again? I get reward. Oh, there are 2 other messages that just came in. Let's check again, right? And so every time something new comes in, we are drawn into. And this dopamine pathway, it's really running then pretty on high steam. And it works like the following. If I can start this clip and we can see it.
You're at a cafe with a friend and you hear your phone beep. A text has arrived. Can you ignore it? Do you feel like you have to check it right away? Is it impossible to ignore? Are you addicted to texting? Well, kind of, yes. The reason is dopamine. Created in various parts of the brain, dopamine is critical in all sorts of brain functions, including thinking, moving, sleeping, mood, attention, motivation, seeking, and reward. Dopamine causes us to want, desire, seek out, and search. It increases our general level of arousal and our goal-directed behavior. It's not just about physical needs such as food or sex, but also about abstract concepts. Dopamine ignites curiosity and fuels our searching for information. Researchers used to think that dopamine was the pleasure chemical. When you did something pleasurable, eating or sex, then dopamine was released. But the latest research shows that there are really two complementary systems. While dopamine is the wanting system, the opioid system is the liking system. The wanting system propels us to action, and the liking system makes us feel satisfied, so we pause our seeking. The wanting system is stronger than the liking system. We seek more than we are satisfied. Think evolutionary advantage. Seeking is more likely to keep us alive than sitting around in a satisfied stupor. Dopamine induces a loop. It starts us seeking, then we get rewarded for the seeking, which makes us seek more. It actually becomes harder and harder to stop looking at email, stop texting, stop checking our cell phones to see if we have a message or a new text. Not only that, but dopamine is in the basal ganglia, which controls motor movement. Dopamine directs us to move, and when we do pick up the cell phone to check for messages, more dopamine gets released, which strengthens the motor circuit, making it more likely we'll take that same action again. Dopamine is also released into the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex. The nucleus accumbens responds to the unexpected. When something happens that's not exactly predictable, that stimulates the dopamine system. Texts show up, but when will they arrive? Who will they be from? It's unpredictable, and this is exactly what stimulates the dopamine system. The dopamine system is especially sensitive to cues that a reward has arrived. Even a small cue that something's going to happen can set off our dopamine system. The beep of our phone increases the addictive effect. And the dopamine system is most powerfully stimulated when the information coming in is in small bursts so that it doesn't fully satisfy. A short text or Twitter can only be 140 characters is ideally suited to send our dopamine system raging. Unpredictable visual and auditory cues, short bursts of information, the latest drug on the street. Oh hey, I think I hear my phone beeping. Wow. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to The Brains.
All right. Well, that was pretty informative, right? In terms of what is pulling us in. There are two other really important parts to digital environments, and one is called the Google effect. And this relates also to our digital environment that is full of information that we also benefit from, because we can Google things all the time. We can gain access to online journal articles via the UF library. Thousands are at our fingertips, right? But the Google effect says that people are using the internet as a personal memory bank. They call it transactive memory. And this was an article by Bohannon published in Science. Quite interesting, because here the temptation is that we don't remember, we don't actually take in information, because we can Google it later, right? As faculty members, we might have sat in some qualifying exam and wondered if students have taken in anything, because they seem to remember really not as much from our coursework, because possibly they suffer from digital amnesia. That's what it's called when, in essence, we are not able to remember, we are not really understanding things because we can browse the internet and it's out there. And of course, that is also something that is definitely not very mindful, right? As we have learned. Another interesting, and this is one of my last slides that I want to share with you today. It's called brain drain. As we know, smartphone owners interact with phones on average 85 times a day. And although these devices have an immense potential to provide us with so many benefits and provide so much welfare, it's very persistent in terms of the use. It forms a habit. And so here, this study by Ward that just came out was testing the brain drain hypothesis, that the mere presence of one smartphone that you have, how that relates to cognitive resources and the capacity to actually relate it to cognitive resources. So they did studies where they had participants with their phone just in front of them and doing a task. They had the participants putting it in their bag, right? And other participants in third group where they told them, leave your smartphone at home, right? So there were significant differences found between these groups. And in essence, their conclusion was that, in essence, having your smartphone just inside in front of you or really close by, it actually comes at a cognitive cost, meaning that your cognitive capacity is declined by simply knowing my phone is close by. So that tells us, in particular here at a university, either leave your phone at home, which might be difficult, leave it in your office, or at least leave it in your bag, because it enhances, it really reduces your cognitive ability to perform tasks, to be at your best, right? Studying, learning, engaging with material. So be mindful about it. And just as a summary in terms of what we have learned today is that, well, it is essential to observe our patterns. What type of relationship do we have with our smartphones? How important are they? How many times, maybe do an experiment, how many times are you really touching it each day or for a whole week in average? And then actually become aware of your impulsivity to just grab it. Or in a session or in a meeting, I need to check, right, what's there, because there must be something really, really important, showing that your dopamine is possibly running really at high, right? So this attaching and detaching pattern, to look more closely into it. And that means also we have an opportunity to integrate mindfulness in our lives, to become more attentive, to put more attention into our patterns, how we relate to cyberspace, to social media, to our digital environment, and also to become more aware of these patterns among yourself, maybe your close friends or family, but also those that you relate to. What patterns do they have? Maybe you have a partner that is addicted to it, and you suffer, you are impacted, right, by being drawn into also constant messaging. And then I put last, become really real, meaning, well, you have a chance here to be really mindful. And we have seen also some of the benefits that really being mindful also with digital media can have, because they are part of our lives, they are there. Right? And that will not change in the near future. And it might become more intense. So if we have already unhealthy patterns, then it's time possibly to maybe do some adjustments. Maybe say, well, this week I limit myself to send 50 messages. That's the limit, no more. Right? So experiment. And I invite you also to really be open to look at it, not judgmentally, but really with openness and curiosity. Yeah, thank you so much. Are there any questions, things you wanted to ask or know? Anything? No? Okay. Then let's take a mindful break. Thank you.